At this very moment, someone, somewhere in the world, is reading Shakespeare.
The actor, playwright, and poet we all love and know, William Shakespeare, was born in April 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire, England. His exact birthday is unknown, but we do know that he was baptized on April 26. Shakespeare is widely considered one of the greatest writers to ever use the English language. At around 1585, he began his writing career. Most of his famous plays were written from 1589 to 1613, such as Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Hamlet, and King Lear. Shakespeare's plays became mostly successful in around 1592, with his plays showing in London theaters. Shakespeare's group of actors was originally only a small group of men, first called Lord Chamberlain's men, but later gained King James I's approval and changed their name to the King's Men. In 1599, Shakespeare was gaining more popularity and later opened the Globe Theatre. Shakespeare has greatly influenced other writers and many generations after him.
Shakespeare worked the English language, milked it for all it was worth, made up words if it didn't give him the right words. He is one of the first professional writers.
One of the authors that admired Shakespeare most reverently was a poet named John Keats. Keats was one of the main figures in the second generation of Romantic poets. Keats says in a letter to his friend, "I remember your saying that you had notions of a good genius presiding over you. I have of late had the same thought. Things which I do have at random are afterwards confirmed by my judgment in a dozen features of propriety. Is it too daring to fancy Shakespeare this presider?" Another one of Shakespeare's admirers was Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle, who was famous for writing The French Revolution and Sartor Resartus. He summarizes Shakespeare's influence as, "This King Shakespeare does he not shine, and crown sovereignty over us all, as the noblest, gentlest, yet strongest of rallying signs, indestructible, really more valuable in that point of view than any other means or appliance whatsoever?" Shakespeare's most famous dedication is probably from English playwright Ben Jonson. Jonson starts with saying, "To draw no envy, Shakespeare, on thy name, am I thus ample to thy book and fame," and then famously states that Shakespeare was not of an age, but for all time. A lot more authors have openly admitted to being influenced by Shakespeare. These people are also very skilled writers like Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, William Faulkner, Agatha Christie, and others. Plenty of additional artists have used Shakespearean phrases and plots in their own works. There have been lots of modern remakes of Shakespeare's plays, showing that Shakespeare is still inspiring people today.
Shakespeare talked about the human condition. He explains to us how we think, how we feel, the human psyche. He eloquently explains it. I would argue that Shakespeare's legacy is the most influential figure in human civilization.
Shakespeare was not only a playwright, he also was a poet.
Since most remember William Shakespeare for his plays, some forget that he is actually also a poet. Many people also don't know that the words they are using today were in Shakespeare's plays hundreds of years ago.
Shakespeare's phrases, the ways he used words, are so common that people often get mixed up and can't remember if they came from the Bible or from Shakespeare. My grandmother used to say, when something bad happened, that these were the slings and arrows of everyday life. She was not an educated woman, and she didn't go to Shakespeare plays. She didn't get that one from the Bible.
We have used these words and phrases so often that we can't differentiate which came from Shakespeare's plays and which came from somewhere else. Even though Shakespeare was greatly talented, not everyone praised him for it. Although boys normally attended grammar school until age 15 or 16, Shakespeare may have been forced to leave school as early as age 13 because of his financial difficulties.
We think he may have been educated in the King's School at Stratford because that would have been typical for a child with a father who was an alderman. What we do know is that he didn't go to university.
Another poet named Robert Greene was famous for his negative critique of other writers. He famously called Shakespeare an upstart crow in his book Groat's Worth of Wit. There has been arguments of Greene's words' meaning, but most believe that Greene was accusing Shakespeare of reaching above his rank to match such university-educated writers. Robert Greene heavily criticized Shakespeare for his lack of education, but Greene was not the only one. Someone else was English diarist Samuel Pepys. Pepys attended a performance of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream and was not happy. He wrote, "We saw Midsummer Night's Dream, which I had never seen before, nor shall ever again, for it is the most insipid, ridiculous play that ever I saw in my life." Another was a more recent author, Leo Tolstoy, who wrote the famous novel War and Peace. He called Shakespeare's plays trivial and positively bad, and even wrote a 100-page essay critiquing Shakespeare's writing and reputation. There are, of course, others, including famous author of The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien, theater critic George Bernard Shaw, and French writer Voltaire.
In the 18th century, questions arose about the authorship of Shakespeare's work.
Many people know that Shakespeare was actually not well educated, which leads to many more authorship debates on who Shakespeare actually was. Some speculate it was Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, or perhaps Sir Francis Bacon, 1st Viscount St. Alban. Both of these men were raised with an above-average education and also had a phenomenal writing talent. Even though the arguments have valid reasons, most still think that there was actually a man named William Shakespeare who had the skill and gift to be remembered for hundreds of years later. In 1610, Shakespeare's career then began to slowly die down, with him writing fewer plays. His last 3 plays are collaborations, mostly assumed to be written with John Fletcher, who succeeded Shakespeare as house playwright of the King's Men. Shakespeare's last breath was taken on April 23, 1616, at only 52 years of age.
The details of William Shakespeare's death remain a mystery.
There is no confirmed reason for his death, though about 50 years later, John Ward said that perhaps Shakespeare had drank too much when meeting Ben Jonson and Michael Drader, and then died of a fever. Plays were very popular back when Shakespeare was alive, as there was no television or different kinds of electronics. Shakespeare was able to quickly come up with ideas and plots, then transform the words into reality on stage. Not everyone has the capability to do these things, but Shakespeare definitely knew what he was doing. Though Shakespeare has written 37 plays, his most famous ones are his tragedies. The plays that we think of first, and the ones that people enjoy the most, tend to be his tragedies. Why? We all know that life isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Not every story has a happy ending. Shakespeare's tragedies are called tragedies because they usually end with a sorrowful but realistic ending. William Shakespeare knew that seeing the real world on stage is really a memorable experience for people, thus giving him his reputation of being among the greatest in literature. When asked what makes Shakespeare so special, someone once said, "It's because he gets to the big stuff really quickly." By the big stuff, she means love, death, revenge, conflict, power, etc. His plays is really reaching out to people's hearts, reaching into their feelings, and showing the audience the real world. People enjoy seeing their own lives being transformed into something live, and Shakespeare managed that.
And even though he died 400 years ago, someone else is writing about him or acting in one of his plays. Watching Shakespeare's plays is like being invited into a house full of amazing rooms. You'll also meet people with deep and powerful emotions, wild jealousy, crazed hunger for power, terrible sadness, great happiness, sneering contempt.
We have really been able to learn more about Shakespeare's life and understand how William Shakespeare, an average man born in the bustling streets of London with no education, became the respected and appreciated author, poet, and actor today.